There's no way it was peaceful if they were Pacific Rimming people. Is that what you said? That sounded grosser than I intended it to be.
Please take that out.
How do you Pacific Rim someone?
I was trying to make the movie reference, and then I said it, and I was like, porno.
Time to learn, time to laugh. It's the Death Address.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of The Death Address. This week, we're going to be talking about King Edward II.
Mm-hmm.
Jordan went ahead and did the research again to jump back into the leading rule and going over the information we have. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoy the episode and have some laughs with us. Jordan, take it away.
Okay. Okie doke. So you have to give me a little bit of latitude here. I haven't done this in a little bit.
You can have some longitude.
That's dirty.
So I did mine on Edward II. He was King of England in the late 13th century, beginning of the 14th century. He was actually king in the 14th century and was born in the end of the 13th. But he was really known for not being that great of a king. He didn't really make a lot of people happy. He was a little selfish with his wants and desires and putting those ahead of other people. He also had some conspiracy around his death. So we'll get into that here in a little bit, but I don't want to give anything away too early. But
you got to tease the audience.
Yes. So anyways, Edward II, he was also known as Edward of Carnarvon or Carnarvon. I looked it up. It's mainly known for like a castle in Wales. But he was born April 25th.
Like a castle made of whales?
No, it's a castle in a whale.
But he was born April 25th, 1284, so right at the end of the 13th century in Wales. And he supposedly, most historians accept that he died in September of 1327. So he wasn't very old, but he potentially could have died later into like 1330. But we'll go into that conspiracy in a little bit.
3 years is not much of a difference.
You know, just a little bit there. But he did die, if he did die when they said he did, in Gloucestershire, England. And he did reign for 20 years as King of England from 1307 to 1327.
That's how long he reigned for?
Yeah, reigned for 20 years. And
this guy's the villain of Braveheart.
Oh, is he really?
Robert the Bruce, right?
Oh, yeah, Robert the Bruce. We talk about him.
Okay.
I asked her, I was like, are you sure it's not the Brute? And she's like, nah, it's the Bruce. I'm like, all right, Bruce Willis.
He's very brief in this story, but we'll talk about him for just a little bit.
Robert the Bruce Willis.
So, yeah. But yeah, he had a lot of issues with Scotland. So that will come up. Scotland, France.
For Scotland.
His wife, his lovers.
Ooh. Ooh.
Yes. So anyways, early life, he was the fourth son of Edward I. Fun, not so fun fact, all three of his older brothers died. So he became heir apparent to the throne when his oldest brother, that was still alive at the time, Alfonso, died, which he actually died only a few months after Edward was born. So he never knew his brother. He never really knew siblings at all.
So he plotted to kill him as a baby?
Yeah, I was just about to say, I was like, as soon as he came out the womb, he was like, you dead, you dead, you dead. I'm king.
So, but yeah, and his brother died of illness. So, you know, but
Quote,
it was also...
air quotes, illness.
I will say this, though. His brother died a few months before his wedding. So, I mean, right before he could have an heir.
Air quotes, wedding.
But, you know.
Air quotes.
He became heir apparent right after his brother died. So as an infant, he became the next heir. And starting around, and this was actually in 1284. So same year he was born, he became the heir apparent after his brother died. Then
plotting from birth.
16 years later, starting in 1300, he started to go with his father, Edward I, on campaigns to pacify Scotland. So his dad actually was trying to...
When you say to pacify Scotland, they're like...
Genocide.
Pacifiers? Like, hey, you guys are stressed out. Stick this pacifier in your mouth.
Yeah.
It's like that Vin Diesel movie, The Pacifier.
That's what I was thinking. Is that... am I wrong?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. Good try, though.
Dang.
But yeah, he started to go on campaigns to, make peace. But like Andy was saying, it wasn't nearly as peaceful as it sounded. And, his dad was trying a little bit harder than Edward II ever did. His dad started taking him on these expeditions. He started to get familiar with Scotland and kind of what was happening politically and what his father was trying to do. And 6 years later, when he was 22, he was knighted in a grand ceremony at Westminster Abbey. And then following his father's death the next year in 1307, he was actually succeeded to the throne. And
So he killed his father finally.
I actually don't remember reading how his dad died. Who knows?
He took him hunting for that dinosaur he always promised him.
Yeah.
I think seceded.
never came back.
Was it seceded? Because I feel like seceded was when you
when you secede somebody is when you
surrender.
Seceding is what Texas wants to do.
Yeah, when you leave.
But I thought it worked both ways. Maybe not.
That'd be hot.
Oh, there's a lot of things that work both ways in this episode.
But yeah, so anyways, as soon as he did ascend to the throne, he immediately gave the highest offices to all of Edward I, his father's most prominent opponents.
Ooh.
So he was like, screw you, Dad. Here's all your enemies. I'm going to give them some of the highest offices in the country.
See, he murdered his dad. He had a dad. He had a weird father-dad relationship with him.
Now, I did no research on his father's
wait
death.
to be king.
So...
I just can't wait to be
could
king.
not wait to be king.
Yeah.
Love it.
So yeah, he immediately did that and almost instantaneously earned the hatred of every baron in the area who basically were his father's supporters. He kind of flipped the whole table around and made enemies very, very early on. And
Sick.
he granted now I should say here, this was back in 1300, so 7 years prior. He did have somebody join his household. His name was Piers Gaveston. And this is kind of the first controversial relationship of his life here. And it's supposedly, it was a homosexual relationship with Piers.
Oh, you weren't kidding.
Yeah.
No,
And some people say, they were just really great friends. Some say that they were sworn brothers because they had been, friends 7 years before he became king. But others say, yeah, they were lovers.
Some say it was the first bromance taken too far.
Yeah,
They were bunk buddies.
Yeah. But regardless of all that,
But not the last.
yeah. So supposedly though he was added to his household in 1300. They were really, really close. We'll just put it that way. And there's actually, this is a total side note, but Christopher Marlowe, one of the big playwrights in the 16th century, he actually wrote Edward II, which supposedly was inspired by Edward II's relationship with Piers Gaveston. So there's a lot of media and different portrayals of their relationship throughout history. So that's kind of a cool little...
He wasn't just his bro, he was his step bro.
Is this where they got the plot for Brokeback Mountain?
Actually, I don't think there was any cowboys involved. That, is a little bit different.
Oh.
Well, they switch it up over the years.
You can't have Brokeback Mountain without bro.
Bros.
They're so ridiculous. But anyways, once he did take power in 1307, one of the very first things he did, those highest offices that he gave out, was he gave Piers Gaveston the earldom of Cornwall.
Cool.
Which really pissed a lot of people off because this was a big chunk of land, really high title.
On the guy.
And it also gave him a lot of power. So Piers was really high ranking, had a lot of power over the decisions that these previous barons had. And when this happened and all of the, previous high power barons saw it, they drafted a document known as the Ordinances. And they later became known as the Ordinances of 1311. Now, this committee that they called themselves had 21 different barons in it. and it demanded the banishment of Piers Gaveston, and it also wanted to restrict the king's powers over finances and appointing people to these higher offices. So basically, they drafted this whole document, brought it to King Edward II, and was like, look, bro, you got too much power. You're making stupid decisions, and we don't like your bro Piers. So
wait, so was their motivation to do this homophobic, or was it?
I think it probably, the homophobic part of it came after the fact. It was more, at first they were like, this isn't okay. You took our land. You took, our potential for money. You took our titles. And it seems like this guy is the forefront of that decision. And
the foreplay of the decision?
The foreskin?
You were going for foreskin there.
I think that was it. I missed it.
Well, and actually before this happened, before this whole Ordinances of 1311, Edward was actually married. He married Isabella of France. She was only 12 years old when they married.
Naturally.
And it was actually due to tensions between the English and the French crowns, because she was the daughter of, her dad was, he was one of the King Philips of France.
One of them.
Oh, here, King Philip IV of France. Yeah, King Philip IV of France.
The fourth of France.
And so when they married, and she was only 12 years old, it wasn't for love. It wasn't for any good connection that they have. It was strictly political, just to resolve some of the tensions between them. So they married in 1308, which was 3 years prior.
How old was he?
He was born in 1284.
So he was almost 30, or
he would have been
30?
24.
Jeez.
Yeah, 24, twice her age.
12-year gap.
He was 2 12-year-olds.
Really knew how to do
He was 2 12-year-olds.
Yeah. So now I will say Isabella held her own, and she's a huge part of this story later on, but she actually became known as the she-wolf of France. She was super diplomatic, had really great diplomatic skills. She was really intelligent, beautiful. She actually became known as a femme fatale figure later on in some of those plays and literature that I was talking about. And, that kind of led to a little bit, I think it was more, she was a very strong woman, but she, was known as being beautiful but cruel and very manipulative, which, does play out later.
I mean, if you think about it, that's kind of what she needed to do. She got married at 12, forced into marriage at 12.
Yeah.
You kind of have to pick that up to
fend
for yourself.
Unfortunately, at the age of 12, they got married, immediately started having heirs. It was probably rough, of the time. I'm sure it was more expected, but
it'll make you bitter.
Ew.
Yeah, not a whole lot of love in that marriage. So, while that was all happening, Edward II had his, friendship lover with Piers.
Step bro.
And so about this time, between 1307 and 1311, that's 4 years where he gained immense power over these barons. Piers Gaveston did. So the Ordinances of 1311 came around. Now, when this happened, because there were so many barons and all of their estates and all the people that followed them who were so upset about Piers having the power, Edward reluctantly agreed to exile him. He was practically forced into making him leave the country. And he was, gone for a while, and when they banished him, essentially the barons, they gained a lot of that power back. And when they did that, Edward lost a lot of his power as well, because they revoked a lot of his reforms. They essentially tried to put everything back to how it was when Edward I was ruling.
So he was a little butthurt by it.
Yeah, he was.
What country was he in?
England.
So it was make England great again.
It was kind of that. Yeah, they were real upset about their loss of power and basically just formed too big of a group for him to say no to.
Unmute, but mega sounds way cooler than mega.
Crap, I couldn't unmute.
Now, as all of this is happening, like I said, Isabella was really diplomatic. I should say she was very savvy as well. And she was trying to, back Edward and keep all of his supporters happy. So she agreed with having Gaveston leave. Now, at first, there was a lot of contention between Isabella and Piers Gaveston. They did come to be friends a little bit later on. I don't know if friends is the right word, but they tolerated each other a little bit more. But at this time, she was really more of a peacemaker, just trying to keep things civil, because it was a peace between Edward and Isabella for England and France. So yeah, anyways, that all happens. Piers Gaveston is banished. Edward's trying to make all the barons happy. He loses a little bit of his power. And as this is happening, they kind of just live their lives for a little bit, and things are going great. And then in 1312, Edward tries to bring Gaveston back. So he tries to bring him back. The couple months go by of this happening. He's like, this is not okay. Well, when he tries to bring him back, more of the barons.
It's been almost a year. I thought you guys would have forgave us.
Yeah. And one of them actually was Edward's cousin, the second Earl of Lancaster. He led a group of barons and actually seized and executed Piers Gaveston in 1312.
Shit.
He was not expecting.
So they were like,
Poor
screw
little
you.
feller.
Yeah, you can't bring him back because it's just going to cause the same issues.
Dude, we banished him and you brought him back. We have to kill him now. You knew the rules.
Yeah.
Still a better love story than Twilight.
Naturally.
So
Thought you guys were kidding.
I mean, really, though, that's, 11 to 12 years of really, close relationship for Edward and Piers. So as you can imagine, Edward was really pissed. He was really, really mad. But
Wait, he wasn't cool with them doing that?
No.
Oh, okay.
He's going to have a
bothered him.
BF, a bitch fit.
Yeah.
I feel like that's fair.
And that unfortunately started several years of armed confrontation between himself and the Lancaster group. And some of it, he had to bide his time because he didn't have the power or the support behind him to really do anything at that point.
When you say armed, were they with slingshots?
Like bear arms.
I'm going to say a little bit heavier artillery.
Haven't you seen Braveheart?
Swords. Well, and as this is
they threw Mel
happening,
Gibson at him.
well, and as this is all happening, so Piers Gaveston dies in 1312. Edward's trying to cope and move forward and do these things, and Edward is still not having this whole peace with Scotland. He's still not making any great decisions to keep the peace treaty that his father tried to put in place, and the English forces were pushed back in Scotland, so he had, some military there trying to take over, and that leads to the Battle of Bannockburn in
Probably
1314, and that was probably the big battle in Braveheart that was led by Robert the Bruce. And when that happened, unfortunately for the English, it did not go well. Widespread famine followed, and most of the nobility and the common people were criticizing his reign.
Edward?
Yeah.
So it was he was like, I'm finally king. What can I do to fuck up what my dad did?
That really was a lot of it, I think. So,
But Mel Gibson was there to stand up to him.
yeah.
Man, with
You
that
mean
speech,
Joe
he
Nibson?
rallied the troops. He was just like, they may take our wives and our elderly and the sick and disabled and my brother Ned, but
List
they'll
off
never
like 80
take my
people.
freedom.
Yeah. So that all happens, and that's again 1314. Not as much happened that I took note of between that time and the early 1320s. A lot of it was still him just trying to scramble and get purchase where he could and try to gain his supporters back. But around that time frame, he becomes close with the Despencer family, and in particular, Hugh Despencer. I hope I'm saying that right. It looks like
huge
Dispenser.
It does look like dispenser, and when you put
Yeah.
huge in front of it, I got my porn name.
It's not huge, it's Hugh.
Oh, it's Hugh?
Hugh Despencer.
Yeah, I thought that was a G.
But Hugh Despencer was the son of an earl, and he became kind of the next suitor for Edward II. There were a couple other ones in there, but none of them are really as important.
His name has Le. It's Le Huge Dispenser. The Huge Dispenser.
Yeah, Hugh Le Despencer was his.
Huge. The dispenser.
Yeah.
It works either way.
But he became really close friends, and an advisor to Edward. And during this time, again, Edward has a really bad tendency of giving power to people he feels are close to him, no matter what their, actual background is. So he gave Hugh Despencer a big, vast domain covering most of South Wales.
I mean, he had to pay Hugh Despencer back for what he gave him.
And I mean, honestly, giving the power
they've made
to the
on
people
taxes
that he
alone
likes
from
just-
weed.
Yeah, well, and basically in those times...
Hold on. What did you say, Ethan?
I was like, honestly, giving the power to the people that he likes sounds like just history and current time in general.
Yeah, it's true.
But
it's
history
true.
repeats itself.
Yeah,
I mean, we're going through it in this
nepotism
day and
is
age
always
right
the
now
thing.
again.
Yeah.
So
Well, and basically in this time period, land equaled power. So when he gave that big domain covering most of South Wales to Hugh, he made him super powerful, and he was like, people can't say no to him.
Why'd you give that huge of land?
And basically, whatever Hugh wanted, he was able to get because of that power that Edward gave him. So nobody was really safe. If they pissed him off, they could lose everything. And it was really, Hugh could say something to Edward and turn his ear, and it would happen. So Hugh really was kind of the force behind a lot of the decisions that Edward made during that time. And when that happened, of course, everybody was super upset about it. The barons were like, oh, God, this again. And so they tried to come up with another solution to get the power back in their hands. Now, if you remember, the Lancaster group was part of the ones that killed Piers Gaveston. And the barons were really close with them because, they did this huge coup. And Lancaster, at the time, their family was seen, they didn't have like the technical power, but they had the support of all the people. They had the support of the barons. They were the true power in the area at the time.
They were just very popular. They were like the Kardashians.
Yep, super popular, had a lot of support. So they did have power because they had the support of people. They just didn't have the monetary power that Edward had, the one that he took back when he basically canceled the ordinances of 1311. And during this time, 1321 rolls around. They're like, this is ridiculous. It's been, a few years of this. Hugh's gotten on everybody's nerves. They're like, we hate this dude. So Lancaster and several of the barons actually seized the Despencer's land, the one that the king gave him, and then they forced the king to exile them as well. So pretty much playing the same thing that they did with Piers Gaveston. So this time, though, Edward was like, screw this. I'm not going to allow this again. And he led a short military campaign and captured and executed the Earl of Lancaster. So he kind of took it into his own hands.
Lannister or Lancaster?
Or Lancaster, excuse me.
I was like, wait, we just went into Game of Thrones.
Yeah, Lancaster. Yeah.
Wait, I can't sing too much of it.
Well, copyright.
But he captured and executed the Earl of Lancaster.
He was just like, I'm taking my ball and I'm going home.
Yep. Lancaster, God damn it. But yeah, so he did all that. And this essentially, beforehand, he had not formally revoked the ordinances of 1311, just he kind of turned away from them. But at this point, he formally revoked them. And he took that in a really extreme measure and executed all his enemies and took all of their land. So he went after these barons. Yeah,
I mean, they killed his past lover and they tried to kill his now lover.
Yeah, so he really went after it, killed all the barons that were behind Lancasters, and took all their land.
So, like, what's Isabella been doing this whole time while he's just like?
So she's been having babies. She's still trying to be supportive as much as she can, because again, she's there to keep the peace between him and France.
Heckin' wifey material.
This sounds like the Game of Thrones situation with the Renly Baratheon.
Yep. So, and I mean, she was trying to support him as much as possible because he was really screwing things up with Scotland. She didn't want there to be a huge issue with France, so she was trying to keep, as much peace as possible. And she really was, a powerful player in all this, even if she was more behind the scenes during these times. And she actually publicly pleaded with the king at this point to exile Hugh Despencer. she's like, you got to get rid of him. He's causing all these issues. You need to do it at least, not for yourself, just for the kingdom's sake. And yeah, he was not happy with this. As soon as Hugh heard she was trying to get Edward to get rid of him as well, he took advantage of his power and his ability to, adjust legislation. He really screwed her over, because at this point she wasn't outwardly saying, to the people he's horrible. She was just trying to do it more to protect the kingdom and to protect Edward. But Hugh, when this all happened, he basically destroyed her life. He placed her, arrested her, and imprisoned her along with all of her French staff, because tensions were rising at this point between France and England. They confiscated all her lands, took over running her household. They also removed her children from the home, and they put her in the custody of the Despenser family. So
they put Isabella?
They
Wow.
arrested and imprisoned her, took her children, imprisoned all her French staff. And at that point, unfortunately, she kind of broke. She realized that she had no hope of working through things with Edward. He was really under the control of Hugh Despenser and the family. And she started to think about radical solutions. She was done with it.
Shouldn't have messed with her children.
Yeah. Well, especially when...
Wait, is this a Quentin Tarantino movie yet?
It will be after this podcast.
Yeah, so... Yeah, and her opinion essentially of her husband turned to one of kind of long-suffering distrust of him, just to violent contempt of anything that he was doing. So, like I said, at this time, tensions were rising with France. They just imprisoned the princess of France, essentially the Queen of England, and took her children away. And so in 1324, when all this was happening, even though supposedly Hugh was kind of the leading cause behind this, she knew that Edward was behind this as well. He didn't stop it. Yeah. But Isabella's brother, the now King of France, was like, okay, this is not okay. He wanted to do something essentially to hurt Edward as well. So he threatened to take away Edward's possession in Gascony, all of his possessions there, his land, everything. And he responded poorly to this and actually issued an edict commanding the arrest of all French aliens in England and Wales.
Whoa.
Wait, when did we get aliens?
It's getting heavy now.
Immigrants, essentially.
Oh.
So pretty much all French immigrants in England and Wales. He was like, you're going to take my stuff, I'm going to take yours. So, by
that he meant
his
people. Like,
so
Yeah.
England and France at this point was just a dysfunctional marriage.
The 1300s was a messed up place.
Yep. And,
Time.
after all this happened, Edward sat back and was like, oh man, that probably was not a very smart decision. And so he,
Hey guys, did I make the right choice?
yeah. So he turned to his wife, who at the time he believed she was still going to support him and back him and everything. He did not realize that she had broken
Like fucking
and was,
men.
Yeah. And she was, plotting what she could do to get away from him and do those kind of things. So he
he's
turns
like,
to her.
I know they captured you and threw you in like a dungeon, but you're still with me, right?
Yeah.
We cool?
Well,
We
and
still
I don't know.
do it?
I don't know imprisonment, if it was like dungeon or more if like, because at that time, sometimes if they imprisoned you and you were royalty, they just put you in like the summer
House
home.
arrest.
No,
Didn't you say
we're
that she
talking-
went to that one dude's house, the dispenser?
Yes, Despenser Estate.
Yeah,
so that's where she
and,
was.
And you know where they kept her? We're talking like Peter Dinklage style Game of Thrones in a dungeon, locked up, like with a shed of light coming in for the camera.
No, I don't think so, because he was still turning to her.
And
It
all
was
she
more-
had to eat was hay.
No,
And they didn't even have horses.
good try. But she was stripped of her children, and it was not in a good mental state.
Because they kept her in the dark.
But but he went to her and was like, hey, things are going really bad between us and France. I can't deal with this on top of Scotland. I'm sorry. can you go and talk with your brother? Can you go to France, try to intercede and arrange peace? Because
Babe, I know we locked you up, but could you please go get my shit back from your
I
brother?
mean, her being as smart as she is probably is going to be oh yeah, totally, babe.
Don't ruin it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was all my CDs there. I need my CDs.
She's going to decline, is what I meant to say.
But and she's like, you know what? That's a great idea. I'll go to France. I'll negotiate a peace treaty. It'll be great. So
while she's saying that, she has her boobs out flashing him.
But she does go to France. She meets with her brother, and they actually do negotiate a peace treaty very quickly. The only condition was that the king's eldest son, which was Edward III, was going to pay homage to the French king in some way. So he's essentially going to suck up and be like, sorry for my dad. He's awful.
Don't say that in this episode.
And when she did this, it was actually a really, really strategic.
Strategic.
Like
how you stopped yourself to say it. I'm not going to say it right. Strategic. Damn it.
It was a really strategic move on her part, because not only is she now out of Edward's grasp and back with her family, she now has the heir to the English throne under her control. Because Edward III, this was the condition that he pay homage to the French king. So super, super smart move on her part. Now,
she was thinking with portals.
Yes. Now, she did take a little bit of a play out of her husband's book. While she was in France, she did meet up with Roger Mortimer. He was the first Earl of March, and he actually had escaped to France when Edward was doing his whole Baron purging. And
he's the one that put March on the calendars.
That's not the least bit true. Good try, though. Because he actually tried to lead an unsuccessful revolt against Edward during those Dispenser Wars, which was essentially when Hugh and Edward were trying to take out everybody. And while she was there, they did become lovers. She was like, screw him, I'm going to stay here and screw Roger. And
give me more to more.
Yep.
If he can have male lovers, so can I.
There you go. Yep. So while they were there, they actually began organizing an invasion of England.
With the French aliens?
Yes, actually. Yeah. So, her army was... God damn it. Her army was really small, only had a few hundred mercenaries and then a few thousand English defectors. So people who had escaped from England when all this was happening. And she really knew what she was doing. She knew that people who were afraid of the Dispensers' ambition and power, especially the nobility, would flock to her if she promised to replace Edward with a new king, her son Edward III, who she did have control over at that time. So she got, this little bit of support behind her. She knew she would be able to garner more support as she moved through. And in September of 1326, so this is just a year after she left for France and refused to come back, started her affair and planned this invasion, she did land on the east coast of East Anglia, I believe.
Correct.
And nobody really stood in her way. She marched on London, and it was so quickly, she was able to get there so quickly that the king barely got the news in time because she had so much support from the nobility and commoners. They were like, okay, cool, come on through. We won't say anything.
Sick.
And he panicked. He was like, holy crap. My wife's and her lover are coming to invade and take over.
You guys realize if she kills you, we'll cover for her.
Yeah. So it was not looking good for him. So he and Hugh actually started panic, stuffed all their belongings into saddlebags, gold, pretty much everything that they could grab before she arrived in London, and fled. They were trying to go to South Wales, that big amount of land that he had given to the Dispenser family. They're like, okay, we're going to go there. It's going to be our power base. We can figure out what we're going to do once we get there. When they arrived, they were actually informed that Hugh's father, the Earl of the Dispenser family, I believed, was actually already dead. He had been executed and his body was fed to the dogs. And when that happened, he was trying to defend Bristol against Isabella, but he lost, and she fed his body to the dogs.
Okay, so
Nice.
this is the one that George R. R. Martin got all of this stuff from, isn't it? For Game of Thrones, wasn't his stuff like
I don't know.
based off of
George
stuff
R. R.
in
Martin
history?
based Game of Thrones off of his turtle collection at the age of 17 that he couldn't keep alive, and he wrote intricate plots for all of their deaths. I'm not kidding you. When his turtles all starved one
His
by
stuff
one,
is based off
he
of
started
things that happened in
making up
history.
elaborate. No,
She just
his
Sansa
turtles were
Starked him.
dying.
She Sansa Starked him and fed him to the freaking dogs.
He was a
dude.
history buff, but when his turtles were dying, he came up with intricate reasons for their deaths, and out of that spun Game of Thrones.
And those intricate
It was
deaths
the
were
song
things he
of
had learned
fire
in
and
history
turtles.
because he was a history buff.
Yeah,
Life
so-
imitates art, vice versa.
That's weird. One of my turtles' name was King Edward the Second.
But yeah,
Isabella's a survivor.
Like,
Isabella's a survivor. She's making it to the end.
Edward just seems like your average, like, dumb ruler that thinks everybody loves them no matter what they do.
Yeah.
And at that point, he just screwed everyone over and was fucked.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, and I will say at this point, the year before this happened, he did reach out to Scotland and try to get peace with them, and
Too
try to
little,
make
too
a
late.
truce with Robert, and he did sign one. But she wasn't super happy about it. The people weren't super happy about it. So it was another kind of thing. So there was tentative peace with Scotland at this time, but it wasn't anything to save him, essentially. There wasn't anything he was going to be able to bring in Scotland as a defense. He was kind of on his own.
Plus, we shouldn't even mention what they were doing to Ireland at the time.
Yeah. There was a lot of death
Poor
and
Irish.
destruction.
Poor Irish
but-
bastards and their damn potato.
Whoa.
But anyways, they get to South Wales. They get to kind of their stronghold, and that's immediately when they find out that Hugh's father is dead. He did get fed to the dogs by Isabella while he was trying to defend Bristol, and it pretty much set the message that when Isabella found Hugh, he is going to be executed in a horrible manner, which did come true. They continued to kind of flee around the country for a little bit, but they couldn't find support anywhere. So they had to keep moving, and eventually they were caught. Edward was imprisoned, and Hugh was hanged, drawn, and quartered in the street in front of a crowd of spectators.
What does quartered mean?
They pulled him in 4 different directions until he ripped apart.
The cool horse thing in that Sean Bean movie.
Yeah. Yep. So, he was tortured and killed once she finally got her hands on
If
him.
anybody's looking to see that happen, you can watch I think, what was it called? Even the Black Plague or something? I don't know. Sean Bean.
I think it's called Black Death.
Black Death. I don't know. It's Sean Bean gets murdered by 4 horses getting pulling apart. It's cool.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
So at this point, it's 1326. He'd fled to Wales, and he was imprisoned around that time, end of 1326. And then in 1327, January 1327, he was forced to abdicate and relinquish his crown to his son, Edward III, who at the time was only 14 years old. So again, super, super good choice putting teenagers in charge of the country.
Yeah, they know best.
Yeah, and I mean, his mom, Isabella, was still in control of him, so she essentially was taking that power when she forced him to abdicate to her son.
Is he old enough to drink beer yet? No? Perfect. Then he'll be sober. Give him the crown.
They didn't have those rules.
I'm pretty sure like the drinking age in England is like 15 even now.
Yeah, but he was 14, so he had a year.
Yeah. No, at this time, so there were still a lot of people that Edward had tried to put into power who did support him. So of course, like whenever you do have a government change like this, he did have some supporters who were opposed to the new government, and they immediately made plans to try to free Edward. So Roger Mortimer, Isabella's lover and partner in all of this, decided to move him to Berkeley Castle in Gloucestershire. And he was brought there in April of 1327. So at this point, he's in Berkeley Castle in Gloucestershire, England. He's no longer in Wales. And once there, he was kept in the custody of Mortimer's son-in-law, Thomas de Berkeley. and John Maltravers, and they were given £5 a day to maintain Edward.
Wow.
Yeah, £5 a day for Edward's maintenance. And a lot of people have kind of talked about how they thought he was cared for. The people who thought he died a brutal death definitely thought that he was starved and depressed and beaten and all these things. Other people think that, you know, there are some records of him getting luxury goods while he was there. But most people think that he was mistreated. And there's actually a poem called The Lament of Edward II. And it was once thought to have been written by Edward during his imprisonment, but most modern scholars think that that's not true. Somebody wrote it after the fact. But yeah, so he was there. He was kept there for a little bit. And there were a lot more plots that were brought forth of people trying to free him. Some of them actually involved the Dominican order and some household knights. And one of them got as far as breaking into the prison within the castle, but that was squashed and they were dealt with very briskly. But because of all these threats, because there was actually an attempted break-in to free him, he was moved around to a lot of other locations in secret during the summer, but he was eventually brought back to Berkeley Castle, and late summer of 1327 was when he was brought back there. So super unstable in the country at the time. Isabella and Mortimer are trying to control the country with Edward III as their kind of puppet in all of this. And yeah, so that's kind of how the summer's going. It's real tense, not a whole lot of happy situations going on. Well, in September, on September 23rd, Edward III was informed that his father had actually died at Berkeley Castle. And most historians believe that this is accurate. They think that he did die in September of 1327. But some people did believe he actually died much later, and we'll get into that in a second.
More death.
And this is kind of the weird part about this. There was a few conspiracies on how people thought he died. Most
Aliens.
of them actually at that time, which it could, trying to think the best way to say this, it could have been more because people did think that he either was bisexual or homosexual, but there was a rumor going around that he was actually killed when they took a red hot poker and shoved it in his anal cavity, and he died from the wounds. That was kind of the biggest, if you like Google Edward II death, that's like the biggest thing that comes up. Once his father had passed and Edward III was informed of his death, his body was embalmed at Berkeley Castle, and it was viewed by local leaders from Bristol and Gloucester at the time. And then it was taken to Gloucester Abbey on October 21st. And then he was finally buried in December, 3 months later, December 20th. And it was probably delayed so Edward III could attend in person because, you know, he had a lot of other things going on at the time. And Gloucester was probably chosen because all the other abbeys had refused to take him. Because, again, a lot of people didn't like him.
Because he sucked.
Yeah, they really didn't like him. But it was a really grand affair. The funeral cost at the time £351. But that's a lot of money by today's standards. He had like gilt lions and gold leaf paintings, and there were a lot of crowds that came to see it. They actually had to put up barriers to manage the crowds that were coming to see. So
who arranged that? Did Isabella hook him up with that?
So that was actually Edward III, his son, arranged
Makes
for all
sense.
that. And at the time, the government probably hoped to do more of like a normal veneer of what was happening in the political agenda. They were probably like, man, things have been real bad. Let's do our normal grand funeral, make everything seem, you know, like it was normal.
Ding dong, Edward is dead.
Now, I will say, as soon as his death was announced, Edward III actually got a little bit pissed. He was like, this is ridiculous. And he turned a lot of the blame on his mother, Isabella and Mortimer. And their rule did not last much longer after that. They ended up, while they were ruling, they made a peace treaty with the Scots, but that was highly unpopular. And then they also spent a lot of money And so a lot of the people who were supporting them, commoners and nobility, were like, hey, we supported you, but now you're doing the same thing. You're just blowing money, not really taking care of us. So relations between Mortimer and Edward III were super strained around 1330-ish. And the king actually conducted a coup of Nottingham Castle where Isabella and Mortimer were staying. He arrested Mortimer and then executed him on 14 charges of treason, including the murder of Edward II. So they had all this funeral, they did everything, and then, a few years later, he was like, he's the reason my father's dead. They're the reason all this happened. Yeah, executed him on charges of treason. And the government, along with it, were like, oh, yeah, no, it's totally his fault. And they blamed Mortimer for all the recent problems.
so literally, it was like history repeating itself in a matter of his son took over for his father being dumb.
Yeah.
It was like years later, even though he was on their side, it's like, oh, maybe I made a mistake.
Yeah.
You just have to have a scapegoat.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It really was, I think, a scapegoat kind of thing. And the fact that Isabella and Mortimer had promised all these things to nobility and commoners, and then they didn't do shit. They're like, okay, well, we're just going to spend the money. We're going to control everything, just like Edward II was doing.
That sounds like every ruler ever.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Now, after Edward III killed Mortimer, executed him for treason, he did spare Isabella, actually gave her a generous allowance, and then she eventually did return to public life. I don't know, if he was able to talk her down or if he was like, yeah, she did her best. But yeah, and around that time with Mortimer's execution, rumors started circulating that Edward II had actually been murdered. It wasn't that, he died of natural causes, which is kind of what Edward III was told, that he just died of like either depression or the circumstances.
They didn't know about the fire poker back then.
No, the fire poker went around.
He fire poked himself.
Yeah.
He lost his will to live.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what he was told. That's kind of when everybody's thoughts started, turning away from him. Oh, he was murdered as a political plot. And Christopher Marlowe, he was the one that actually really, really made mainstream the story of the Red Hot Poker incident. He said that Edward was pinned to the ground by assassins, and that's when it was inserted into his butthole. And it was just, it's a whole thing. But
how much do you have to be paid to assassinate someone with a hot poker to the butthole?
It's just like,
at least £2.
At least $2.
£2. I just like how you chose butthole instead of anal cavity.
I was
that time.
trying to change it
Thank
up.
goodness.
Butthole, anal cavity,
But
pick your flavor.
Some people think it was deliberate propaganda, though, to really heighten the support of Mortimer's execution and just saying like, oh my God, can you believe they did this to a king? And it was also kind of, like I said, hand in hand with the whole homophobia kind of thing. So it was just a lot of talk, and people were like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So
it was a messy time, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Well, he did like it in the butt, so that makes sense.
Yeah, that's, I think, kind of where a lot of it came from. And then a lot of chroniclers in the mid-1330s and 1340s spread it further, and it was supported
now,
even
by
years
spread
later.
Are you talking about his butt cheeks?
so social media basically already existed back in the 1300s, but just by word of mouth.
Yeah, a lot of word of mouth, and they it just kept spreading and spreading. More people were talking about it, and most historians nowadays definitely dismiss the account of his death like that, and their biggest reasoning is there's not a whole lot of logic in his captors murdering him in such an easily discernible manner. They're like, yeah, it'd be pretty clear that he was murdered if they actually did that. So they think it was definitely suspicious as far as like when it happened. It was, very timely. It simplified Mortimer's political problems. It got rid of, his biggest contention. It got rid of all the plots to free Edward.
3 assassins run by with a hot poker in the head. Don't be suspicious. Don't be suspicious.
But they do think that he probably was murdered on orders of the new regime, but it's really impossible to be certain. And this is kind of another factor into why a lot of people think it was murder, just not by Red Hot Poker, with several of the individuals suspected of involvement in his death did flee the country. So it wasn't sure if it was because of the political turn
Sus.
or what happened, but they did run away.
No, we had a vacation planned since the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
Okay,
But I mean, when you saw what Edward II did, just murdering everyone, and then Edward III is here, and you're like, well, I'm suspected of murdering his dad. Like, I should probably get out of here, even if I didn't do it.
Yeah, and that's kind of what they're thinking. But, there's a lot of little things that lead to speculation. And the biggest thing is, and this is the huge conspiracy, is there's a whole other set of theories that he didn't actually die in 1327. Instead, he died in 1330. And the reason people think this is there was this letter called the Fieschi letter, and it was sent to Edward III by an Italian priest who claimed that Edward actually escaped Berkeley Castle in 1327 with the help of a servant and retired and became a hermit in the Holy Roman Empire. And basically, they're saying that the body that they buried during the funeral in December of 1927 was actually that of a porter at Berkeley Castle. And he was the guy that was killed by the assassins. And it was presented to Isabella as Edward's corpse to avoid punishment. So the assassins arrived at Berkeley Castle ready to kill Edward II. He had already fled, so they killed a porter to disguise him as Edward II and presented him to Isabella as like, oh no, we did our job.
You stuck the fire poker up the wrong guy's butt. just beat his face a little bit. She won't be able to tell.
Yeah.
Here he is, your majesty. That looks like his butt cheeks.
Yeah.
Well, they used the fire poker to singe his butthole, so that way the proctologist couldn't identify him.
We can't get
They
it.
just fully took the piss on the job.
Now, I will say, Isabella didn't really have much contact with Edward in the last 5 years of their marriage. From 1322, she pretty much just left wherever he was, because he was living with Hugh at that time. And so she didn't have much contact with him from 1322 to when he died in 1327. So it is feasible, they could kind of disguise a body and she wouldn't really know.
Right.
But yeah, so that's kind of the other big conspiracy. And they do have a couple of tie-in factors. There was a lot of articles on this conspiracy. But they think that the letter is linked to an account of Edward III meeting with a man called William the Welshman. And that the William the Welshman did claim to be Edward II. So there's conspiracy that he did meet with his father at some later point in even 1338. So, it could have been that he did die in 1330 and then, there's other accounts that he lived even longer. So, but yeah, some of the aspects of the letter have been looked over by, different scientists and scholars and things like that. And they did say some of it is really accurate. But there are parts of it, though, they're like, no, that could never have happened. So it's a little bit of yes and no, and just nothing's very clear.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's a few different things for his, suspected death. He could have just died of natural causes in 1927. He could have escaped and lived to 1330. And then he could have lived even longer as a hermit in the Holy Roman Empire and met with his son again in 1338. So there's a few, little weird things there. But overall, when he died, essentially the entire government was like, oh yeah, that Isabella and Mortimer are actually the bad guys here. They buried him with all the rights of a king of England. And they actually did the abbey where he was interned became a huge tourist kind of trap. And I don't know if tourist is the right word at the time. It was actually run by monks. But, his heart was removed and put in a silver container. His whole body was embalmed. It was just a lot of fanfare at the time, because essentially they were like, oh yeah, maybe he wasn't so bad. And maybe this wasn't his fault,
maybe
kind of thing.
We're the assholes.
Yeah.
Are we the baddies?
Yeah, and he was definitely depicted as a king when he was buried, so they didn't strip him of his title, even though he was forced to abdicate at the time. So there's a lot of kind of back and forth on what the government thought of him at the time. And the other thing is when his tomb was actually created, like I said, it became a really popular site for visitors, and the local monks rebuilt it in the 1330s, and the surrounding church. Modifications were made because so many people came in. They actually had to create bigger areas for larger numbers to come in and see his body and his tomb. And Geoffrey LeBaker, who was a chronicler at the time, actually depicted him as a saintly tortured martyr. And Richard II actually gave royal support. It was unsuccessful. This didn't happen, but he gave royal support for a bid to have Edward canonized, which canonization it's part of Christian communion, but basically it declares a deceased member of the church worthy of a public cult and basically gives him the title of a saint. So he tried to make him a saint.
Because out of anybody, he deserved it.
Yeah. Now, this was in 1355, so several years, a generation or two after this all happened. And it actually recently, in 2007, 2008, the entire tomb was restored. And they did uncover his wooden coffin in 1855, still in good condition. So he was really buried in a way where he was kind of the opposite of how he was treated when he died.
Clearly, yeah.
So,
especially if the hot poker was true.
Yeah,
he got the true definition of you became better after you died.
Yeah. Now, as we've moved kind of through time, a lot of people today do see him as one of the least capable rulers of England.
He was the worst ruler.
Yeah, there was a lot of conflicting stuff when I was reading here, but he's mainly remembered for squandering his father's military gains in Scotland, losing that battle of Bannockburn with Robert the Bruce, alienating his wife and causing her to partner with France and invasion. And also all the barons in the area, alienating those and promoting his personal favorites, like Piers and Hugh.
What good thing did he do?
Now, there was a few things. They do a couple of articles, not a whole lot of them, a couple of ones that I found did say that what he did at the time was really oppressive and caused a lot of issues, but people later on argued that he did grow the parliamentary institutions during his reign, and that ultimately was a positive development for England. Mm-hmm. So they're saying over the long term, he did better, even though he really screwed things up when he was there.
He wasn't the hero out of 100 things that he did, one was good.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of people said, at the time he was a big disappointment, but honestly, I mean, he really loved Piers and Hugh. I think, in that time, and I think he made a lot of decisions based on his heart instead of his head. And I mean, he was accused of being homosexual in a time where that was a big deal.
It was just a head in his pants that was making the decisions
starting to be considered acceptable.
Right. And I mean, he was forced into accepting a lot of things that limited his authority. He was forced by the Ordinances of 1311. The Lancaster family really took control in a lot of ways. And I mean, that's a lot to handle. I mean, you're a king, so you think you'd have to, be ready for that. But he did, I think, get to the point a lot like Isabella, where he was forced to a breaking point and made decisions to protect the people that he loved.
Oh, so this is what it feels like.
And he made some really poor decisions, but I do think a lot of it was, he was misled by the people that he trusted most, and he did come in at a time and make some really brash changes that upturned a lot of the decisions his father made, so it was a lot he was kind of put into, and a lot of it is his fault, but I do think some of it was just he was very misunderstood.
Yeah. I tell you what, he'd love the movie Rocket Man if he was alive today.
I mean, if he didn't die in 1327 with some mysterious stuff, he could be.
Yeah, so I do think, a lot of it was very poor choices on his part. Yeah. But, I think he would have been better off if he wasn't a king, and it didn't have those responsibilities. He could have been, a little bit freer to do what he wanted to do. But yes.
Okay. So wrapping it up like we do for every episode once somebody has done the research, since you put in the extensive search requirement to get some information on this. I don't know how to describe him. This
Chap.
not so great dude.
Chap.
What would you say the moral of his story or biggest influence he's had on just life in general today?
Well, I think the moral of the story is it's always a bigger picture.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of it, if you look at it from like Isabella's point of view, like she was doing her wifely duty, she was doing her queenly duties, and she was, she did everything she thought was right. And ended up having her children taken away and imprisoned and, by these people that got closer to her husband. But, she was put into this political marriage at 12 years old. So there was a lot of a lot of people really respect her nowadays, in the age of feminism. But at the time, she was really stripped of power and she didn't have a lot of choices she was able to make. And, this was kind of her way to make those changes. Yeah. And then with King Edward, I think the same thing there. He was, put into this position of heir when he was 4 months old, and who's to say, if he was, just mad at his dad and didn't want to do the same things or whatever it was. But, he wasn't able to live the life that he necessarily wanted to without scrutiny. And I think that influenced a lot of his decisions as well, because he was being told, no, you can't do that. We're not letting you make this decision. We're taking the power away from you. So I think, I don't know. I think there's a lot of deeper things.
So the moral is don't tell your kids no a bunch of times without saying yes every now and then. Because the more you say no.
Don't make a political marriage for peace.
Yeah, and I would say, too, don't put children on the throne and force them to make decisions.
What age is okay?
30s.
And if you were in this situation and you were like, I got 3 kids, shit, 2 of them just died, I'm on my deathbed and I'm the king, we have to have an heir for the throne. Our now youngest son is, let's say, 15, about to be 16 years old. Mm-hmm. The kingdom needs a king.
That's when you put somebody else in place to watch over them.
See, that's when you go into like huge dispenser over here is my right hand man, and you're like, boom, now we have to trust huge over here to.
I mean, it's all fucked up. Royalty in general is just. It's a messed up process.
My answer would probably be, I feel about 15, 16-year-old would be okay to put them onto the throne if they had an advisor.
Yeah.
I wouldn't give the power to the advisor.
Yeah.
I wouldn't give the power to the advisor because then you got some shady shit that could happen. But have somebody advise the 15 or 16-year-old would probably be.
Yeah. I just think absolute power for one individual is never a smart thing.
No.
Absolute power corrupts.
So I guess influence or impact on our world today. Like you're walking down the street and you're like, boom, King Edward II, that was him. What influence or impact would you say he has on our world today?
I mean, I don't think it has as much impact on us, but I think in England, a lot of, like you said, the parliamentary stuff.
Like you're walking down the street and look into a shop and there's a fire poke and you're like, boom, King Edward II.
I mean, maybe. I mean,
now I'm definitely going to think that.
Yeah. I mean, I do think it stands, when you look at history, especially with a lot of the prominent movements that are happening right now with, rights for, the lesbian, gay, transsexual, community.
LGBTQ, that's that right?
LGBTQ?
LGBTQ? Not QT, yes.
And then a plus sign.
Plus. For anybody that's struggling with that nowadays, I think it speaks a lot to, their struggles, even looking back over, years and centuries and seeing that a lot of people with the same issues back then, it's, I don't know. I think it speaks volumes.
Again, history repeats itself.
Yeah.
I would say the moral of the story.
Circle.
I would say the moral of the story for me is don't be an asshole to everyone. It's going to work out in the long run. And hell hath no fury like a woman scorned.
I agree.
Don't be an asshole to everyone or else you're going to die from your asshole.
Hell hath no fury like a red hot poker up the bum.
Oh, man. All right. Well, I think that's it. That was a good, successful episode, and we'll be back in 2 weeks for the next one. And make sure you listen to last week's Death Shifter episode and listen to our special guest Rose from the Ember Witch Saga and some awesome rap and acoustic from Ned Liran and Velicor 78654. It's pretty great stuff. Thanks for joining us, and have a good one, people.
Booyah.
Thanks for listening to The Death Address. Follow our social media pages on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for exclusive information on what's to come and to ask us questions. Take a look at our website at www.deathshifter.com. You can find all of the links there as well as some information about the Death Shifter team. If you're interested in supporting the show, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/deathshifter. We'll see you all next time. Till then, take care of yourselves and
Don't forget to tip your death guides. Time to learn, time to laugh. It's the Death Address.